Chin, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the lockdown sessions.
Hey, Brad. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well. I mean, this is great, right? Because you and I had like a 2-year coaching relationship on a program years ago.
Yeah,
And actually, by the time we finished, we would just have these kind of conversations where we would basically end up laughing at each other because as we were learning how to coach, the lessons were always more fun, I think. And I wanted to invite you in to this because as a director of strategic business development at Red Hat, based out in Singapore, I thought you would have a really interesting perspective on what lockdown would have looked like from a business perspective.
right.
Because you've got a whole team, you are dispersed across Asia, and of course, more importantly, you've had to turn your world into a virtual world as well.
Right.
And you've been doing it longer than we've been doing it here. And I start these sessions in the same way, which is to ask one question and then we take it from there, which
Sure.
is, what have your observations been in lockdown when you look out and you look at business and you look at your personal world? What have you been observing?
Well, one of the points you brought up is, being in Singapore, and Singapore is a small country, right? So we find ourselves being in mostly regional roles. And I've spent most of my time on the plane, probably in excess of 10 years, in a role that covers off all these other countries. So I'm always on a plane, I'm always hopping around and seeing customers. And for the first time in for as long as I can remember, I'm not on a plane. I'm stuck at home. And I've listened to some of your lockdowns as well. And I think it's quite similar. I think everyone's in this predicament where, they find themselves no longer traveling and then having to virtually interact with everyone. And having to manage a team on top of that becomes a little tricky, right? How do you get people together without having to actually meet them and interact with them? And I think with Red Hat as well, we were quite fortunate. In the past, we used to almost regularly meet on a quarterly basis for like a quarterly business review. So we take that for granted in the sense that, we always know that we would come together, we would realign, and we would be able to get, some form of direction from, all these interactions. And we don't have that anymore. So being forced to have to now do this all virtually, and I guess you start thinking about what else you got to do over and above the regular stuff that you're doing, right? Whether it's like virtual drink sessions or virtual coffee chats. I know some people are having virtual office hours. I don't know how effective that is, right? You know how when you're in the office, your doors are always open,
Right.
so people come in and out, but then you can't do that in your own room. So what happens is you set up these virtual coffee hours or virtual chat sessions where you're in a chat room and anybody can jump on at any time to kind of, check in or chit chat and whatnot. So that's interesting. I think Joseph tried doing that. I haven't done something like that. I've just done like monthly team meetings and catch ups and stuff.
Well,
But yeah, so
I love the thought of that, right? So the room is open, and I go in and realize that like the 3 people who are in there, I don't really want to talk to, so I go straight out again.
yeah, unfortunately, if you're running the room, you can't run out of it.
Right.
So it's like they got you in a captive place. You gotta
Yeah,
go
you're
with it.
done. But I found something interesting that you said there in your opening, because particularly as a people manager,
Yeah.
and obviously coming from a development perspective, as I do, working in learning and training and coaching, how has that been for you? Your team is dispersed. You are used to that being like connected with each other. You reference kind of having to work differently.
Yeah.
What does that differently look like when you've got a virtual team that you need to make sure are delivering in pretty difficult circumstances? I mean, how have you managed that? How have you managed motivation?
Well, I think like when it comes to like work and managing pipelines and the hard stuff, right? Looking at sales pipeline and opportunities. I think that's all there. Most of the I guess most of the tools are already there for you, right? We have bridge plans, we've got like spreadsheets to kind of track those things. But what I realized early on was that, you know, when I interact with my guys, when I travel to the countries, there is the business aspect, which we always do. And then there's the informal side of just getting to know them, connecting with them, understanding what's going on. And that gets done, you know, by the way, you know, when we're having lunch or after when we're having drinks, we don't have that luxury of interaction anymore because
Right.
everything is a half an hour session that you've allocated for people, and you jump from one to another, and it can become rather impersonal very quickly. So I try to make it a point like every one session or so in the beginning to kind of just talk about other things, right? Just to understand what's going on with them, understanding what kind of challenges they're facing internally within the country, as opposed to just diving straight into work, right? And it got me thinking even further where maybe, you know, doing that on a one-to-one basis was good, but I also am missing that ability to kind of get all of them together. So I started doing regular monthly meetings, and half of the monthly meetings really involves, you know, certain agendas that we want to cover, and the other half is really just having interactions with the guys and having them have the ability to talk to one another. I tend to extend that out a little by we do this virtual drinks thingy, which is I find hilarious, right? That I have to sit in front of a screen and drink.
With a drink.
If that doesn't scream alcoholism, I don't know what does, you know. but those are the times that we live in, right? And it's nice. So, you know, we have that extended session and people are available, they stay back, and then we have a chat and just have an informal catch up with regards to how things are, right? And I don't know, for me I think that's important to kind of just have that human level beyond just going through the business aspect of tracking where we are and how we're doing from the, you know,
Yeah, I
from a
like it how you
numbers
said
perspective.
as well, because it quickly becomes impersonal. Because actually, you're right. Everybody, wherever they sit, whatever role they're in fact, whatever industry they're in, there'll be a process for tracking progress. And there will be varying degrees of extreme intensity probably on that process, but everyone will have a process. But the reality is that we're people, and when we're designed to connect, we're designed to be together. Like you
Yeah,
say, trust happens outside of the business meetings when you go to
exactly.
Jakarta and work. You have your meeting and you check the credibility of the people in your team, but it's what happens
Yeah,
after that meeting that builds the relationship. The relationship
you're
isn't
right.
built in the meeting.
Yeah,
um, and I think I've noticed that as well, that how do you recreate that feeling of being co-located when we're so dislocated,
yeah. And I've
and
no, it's a good point. No, I was going to say that I've had the fortune or misfortune of having onboard guys during this time of lockdown as well.
oh wow, okay,
So I
how did
had
that
I had
work?
one I had one guy who started on March, and I made my last trip of the year to Thailand to meet him in person. And I'm glad I insisted on going on that trip because that was the last trip I could ever make. Because the minute I came back, the doors closed behind my butt and shut, for
Right,
the rest of the
yeah.
time. So I got to at least meet him, interact with him to some degree, but then he had like 3 days of that, and then he got sent back home, and then for the rest of the last 5 months he's been doing everything through a virtual screen.
Wow.
And I had another guy in Korea who started, which I unfortunately was not able to even go and see him. So I've had to build this with him completely virtually as well. And I can only imagine for them, they're joining an organization, they're joining a boss that they haven't even got a chance to see.
Right.
And it becomes tricky to kind of build a rapport and trust like you talk about, right? How do you do that over a course of half an hour sessions just over Blue Jeans or over Zoom? And that becomes really tricky, right? Because like you say, we don't have that luxury of the informal interactions that tends to happen when you're in country and when you're interacting in person.
And it's the same, I think, for offices as well. So those ad hoc conversations.
Yep.
When I would come to your offices in Singapore, I'd be there for a week. And as a general rule, I would be having drinks for 3 of those nights. One night would be with the program. Another night would be with a couple of expats that, I may have known from Europe. Another night would be, people like us would go out and get a drink and a couple of others would come along, and I'd be sitting in a restaurant downstairs at the office block and someone would walk past. So you have a little chat. And it's that I sense is missing. I don't know how you can recreate that, even with a virtual office hour or a virtual canteen that stays open, till 3 o'clock when canteens seem to close everywhere around the world.
Yeah, I find disconnected from the greater organization as well, because I realize now that most of the calls that I have are already predefined and set, right? And we're there with a set group of people. And there and then I quickly realized that there are interactions that I used to have informally across the office with people that are not within my organization, that are not typically someone I'd interact with, but just having those interactions has given me additional insights into their organization. And when the time's right, I have that ability to call on them and then, understand a little bit more or get information or curry a favor and whatnot. And that ability has completely gone away because I realized I haven't spoken to these guys at all, and it would be kind of weird to just set up a random Zoom or a Blue Jeans call with these guys just to say, hey, what's going on? So maybe once in a while on WhatsApp, but that opportunity is completely gone, right? So that interaction with outside of the circle that you work with is completely dissipated for me, at least.
And you're absolutely right, because something I've noticed, say from the webinars that I've run, which are more organizational based rather than team based, is
Right.
we ran a webinar for another tech company. We had 70 people on the call, so 70 managers on how to stay sane and keep your team motivated was the title during lockdown. It was great fun, actually, really nice.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right. And what was so interesting was I was setting the breakout rooms, and I would give them like 12 minutes to chat. So I would give them like a minute to say hello when they go into the breakout room, and then talk about the topic you've been asked to talk about. They were coming back from the breakout rooms, and I'd be like, so what are the themes you discussed? And they were like, oh, we kind of didn't really get to that. We were kind of, just chatting. It was nice to see each other. And it made me realize that actually, when I was setting breakout rooms, I was giving like 5 minutes extra for every session, every breakout session, just for people to say hello. And we would have these moments where people actually, you could see they'd be looking at the screen, you could see all the chat going down on the side, where people were having those ad hoc chats. It was so nice to see people, because we're all seeing our team members. I think we're sick and tired of our team members because we've had so many team meetings, actually probably more than enough. But what about all those other people where we had all those lovely relationships? It makes me think and want to ask you then, what about from a personal perspective? You're at home, you're with your family. As you said before, you spent the last 10 years traveling. That's quite an adjustment for them.
Yeah, no, the wife especially.
Right.
If you ask anybody, most of them will tell you the wife struggles the most, right? And yeah, I think the profound change in learning for me has really been more on the home front than really on the work front, because for the most part, we have objectives, we have goals that we work towards, and that kind of keeps us kind of in check, towards a certain direction. But from a home front, I found that I've had to reevaluate how I operate within the household, how I interact with family. My wife made a very good point to me. She said that, for the longest time you have conditioned your mind to learn how to leave, but you've never really, operated around the function of how to stay. Because I'm always on the plane, like 50% of the time I'm away. So I start the week, I jump on a plane. So I'm preparing myself for when I'm going to go and what I'm going to do. And then when I come back to all this chaos. And then it takes me some time to adjust as well, because I'm used to being on my own, operating with customers. And then I come home to the chaos. I mean, my son's turning 9, my daughter's 4. I mean, it's a fun age, but it's chaotic, right? And
Yeah.
in the early stages of lockdown, where they didn't even have school, and they're just, bombarded with this. And I've never had to deal with that. So my poor wife, I'm not poor, but great respect for her. She's had to put up with this for the longest time. Like, she knows how to operate in that chaos.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I'm like overwhelmed by this. What is going on in this household? He's like screaming a tantrum, or like, they're playing, they're fighting, and I'm like, it's overwhelming. And I'm asking myself, like, how do I deal with it? You question how you deal with that. And for the most part, even for my wife, she has to get used to the idea of actually having me be around. So she'll never let me live this down, because I'll be stuck in my meetings and I'm obviously preoccupied. And then come 12:30, I get out of it and I walk out innocently. I go, "Hey, what's up for lunch?" And she goes, "What is this, a restaurant?" I swear, she has never let me live that down, right? Because, for the most part, honestly, it was an innocent question. But then when I think about it in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, I guess instead of asking in that way, there's better ways to ask a question, as we've learned over the last 2 years, right? So my mistake on that bit. But yeah, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment for her. It's an adjustment for me. And when it came down to it, I think the thing I had to ask myself was really, what is my role in the family, and how do I contribute and help out in the family, right? Because when it was business as usual and I traveled so much, I guess a lot of the heavy lifting was shouldered by my wife. And you can argue that's fair or unfair, but I think the point was, we took that for granted back then. And then now that or now that I'm actually present at home, you can't obviously expect to operate that way anymore. And that there's some level of expectation that, okay, look, how do I kind of ease the burden and take some of the load, and then find this new way of synergizing between, how you work with the kids, how I can help, and how we can kind of just balance things out, right? Sometimes the kids have, activities and all that, and the natural thing in the past was just to assume that my wife would take them. But now it's like, I have to find a way to prioritize that as well, because, hey, I'm home as well, I can technically do that. And there is flexibility with work. At least people now are a lot more understanding about it, management and whatnot, just simply because everyone's in a similar situation, right?
Right, and actually, I don't think I've run a session where kids haven't popped up on the screen, or a little white
Yeah. I
on.
I prepped my kids today. I'm like, I got a call, don't jump in.
But there's an adjustment for them as well, because suddenly dad's home, and normally dad's not home, and there's an element of that's quite exciting as well,
It
because
is.
you're
It
not
is.
normally there, and you're normally there at the weekend, so we play with you, but actually now we can play with you all the time because you're here.
You're right. You are exactly right. You're absolutely right. That is the case. And I'm glad for them, right? They're actually genuinely thrilled.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, "Why can't you play with me? You're home." I'm like, "Yeah, but sometimes I gotta take a call." But then other times, I guess you kind of just find the balance and say, "Okay, you know what? I'll skip this and I'll come play with you for a little bit," right? So it's nice. It's kind of given me the opportunity to kind of reconnect with the kids as well. And this time, this last 5 months, just watching the kids grow up, right? I mean, how often do you ever get that opportunity to do
No, you
that?
don't. This is,
Yeah,
I think this is where, for those of us who are less sort of phlegmatic and less kind of, I was going to use the word miserable, but that's the wrong word. More dour, where everything is negative. Actually,
yeah,
there are some positives here, and I think, and listen, there are some horrible stories of what's happening in homes where everybody's on lockdown, right? Of
yeah,
course, and we mustn't ignore those. But for some, there is this wonderful opportunity to totally connect with our kids.
yeah,
And listen, enjoy it. 4 and 9 years old are such gorgeous ages. Within the
yeah.
next 10 years, they're going to hate you.
Yeah. They'll start alienating me and locking me out. So now that they
Yeah,
still want me, yeah, I
you're
kind of
just
just appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah, really, just take it for everything because you're going to be a taxi driver and an ATM machine, and that will be your role. Um, but I suppose as well, like listening to you, I'm thinking, I guess there's also a re-establishing of even making time for you and your wife, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're away, I'm imagining a bit like in my own relationship when I was traveling, you would go and do a work day, and then you check into your hotel, and depending on what the plans were, you might be able to grab a quick FaceTime call before you went out,
Yeah.
or it would be just before you were going to bed. And for me, it was always the time difference was always a little bit more challenging there. But we would have
Yeah.
this relationship where we were, oh, listen, I can't speak to you tonight. I'm going for dinner, and it's drinks first, and then we'll probably go out afterwards with the guys. And then all of a sudden, you're at home all the time for her as well,
Yeah.
but you're working because you've got stuff. How have you made? It's a personal question, so feel free to bat it straight back at me. But
Sure.
how have you made time to make sure that you and her also have time?
Well, I think when we were in the first stages of lockdown where we literally couldn't go anywhere, that was really tough because you're just around each other all the time. And but being honest, I think my wife was struggling more with just having to put up with me being in the house for so much because she realized she was used to kind of operating on her own and being self-sufficient, and I was kind of cramping her style because I was just around all the time and
Yeah. What do you
little things
want,
annoy
Kenny?
her. No, but it helped a little when I guess we moved into phase two, where then we were able to go out and have dinners and stuff. Because early on as well, we used to make it a point to have like a date night, middle of the week, so that we can just get out, be just the two of us and connect and all. So I guess we're doing a bit more of that now as well, since appreciating the fact that we can go out. So that actually does help. But yeah, I think it's a conscious effort to work at a relationship and at a marriage as well, right? A lot of times I think we get bogged down with work, and I think when you have young kids as well, you tend to forget, that aspect as well, and everyone gets overwhelmed by this whole situation with the kids that you forget that there's a need to kind of pay attention to the couple side and the marriage as well, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I don't think it's just with young kids, by the way, right? Because I've got a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old who were living here, and it's just as easy to get sucked into something else to do, and suddenly it's 7 o'clock, and you've been working 14 hours, and you go in for dinner, and after dinner you're too tired to even have a conversation because actually you've
yeah,
got to get up at 5:30 the next day to do a coaching session with somebody in Australia. And actually, do you want to watch a movie? I'd love to watch a movie, but I won't stay awake for it. So I need to go to bed. And that's just as easy even with the older kids. Um,
yeah,
if you don't make that effort, I guess even now, right? You're right. I think it's shifted slightly because we can go out.
yeah,
And things were quite strict here at the beginning where you could only go for like one walk a day. And we have the dogs here. So my wife would do the walk in the morning,
mm,
and then I would go for like a run in the afternoon for some exercise and take the dog with me for the run.
right,
And we couldn't even walk together. And this was something I really missed, just going for a walk with the dogs with my wife. Because at the weekend, we would go for like 3 or 4 great walks, find some nice places. Actually,
yeah,
today is a bank holiday here in the UK. So we're actually planning to go for a nice long walk this afternoon with the dogs. Um, but if you don't make the effort, time moves very quickly. I can't believe like I was speaking to one of my friends in China. She was saying to me, Brad, this is now going into month 9 for us since
yeah.
January. You know,
The year's almost wrapping up, my friend.
yeah, it's mad.
Yeah,
So talk to me a little bit about business as well, because
Sure.
From a business point of view, especially from a business development point of view, I'm kind of feeling like, wow, you guys must have taken an absolute battering when this happened.
Yep.
And your team must have been really nervous. The new guys coming in, I'm thinking, wow, what are they thinking with regards to how am I going to generate any kind of business? I'm interested in like your style of motivating the team to kind of stay on point. And also, how have you sort of combated maybe the lack of the business cycle being in full flow? Because it seems,
Okay.
everything's a little bit jagged. What have you done? What have you done there?
So maybe I'll focus on the new guys for a minute, right? And I just had like a couple of sessions with my guys today, and the tricky thing with like the role that we're in is we're business development and we're considered like what we term as overlay sales, right? So we're not directly responsible for the account or the relationship, and we are given territory, so we have multiple account managers that we have to work with. The tricky thing with that is, you know, it's all about the perceived value that the salespeople have of my guys that will determine how much they use them.
Right.
And in the past, when again we are physically around each other and they have that ability to kind of just build rapport, show some level of credibility when we go into customer meetings together and present, that worked out well because again, that increased level of interaction allowed them that ability to hopefully build some rapport. But now my guys are unfortunately faced with this situation where they're covering a country like Philippines and they're based out in Thailand and they haven't even met these people before. And I'm saying, hey, go and try and help them win some opportunities or open up some doors. And there's obviously some level of skepticism because they don't know who this guy is. They haven't even met him physically or whatnot, maybe seen him through a screen. They don't know what he can do. They don't know if when they put him in front of a customer, whether he's gonna be credible or not.
Right.
So it is this situation where it's a very the first impressions for them is going to be absolutely critical. Like I say, you got to nail it and you got to pick your battles by finding, aligning yourself with certain sales reps and working closely with them to demonstrate value. And don't try to boil the ocean by trying to work with too many. Just work with a few, get that going first, show the value. And once that becomes successful, then it's easier to kind of that reputation might replicate and that word may travel, and then the next thing that can happen is that someone else will say, hey, you know what, you did this for that person, can you help do that for me as well? And that credibility now needs to be established and established quick. And yeah, you don't get a second chance at making a first impression, right?
Right, and it goes to this point that we were talking a little bit offline before we started. That trust bit.
Yeah.
Trust doesn't happen quickly.
Nope.
And especially if you're new coming in, you've got to raise your credibility. You've got to show this, what you're talking about, a little bit of reliability as well, that you can actually do stuff. And build a relationship at the same time whilst sharing a two-dimensional screen with somebody and
exactly, being personable virtually like that without being able to read body language and react. It's a
but
tricky thing.
at the same time, I think of even say the relationship that we developed. We spent a total of 2 days together.
Right, that's true.
in person, right?
Yeah.
So on the first year of our program, when we got together, I spent 1 hour in a room with you and 25 of your colleagues.
That's true, actually.
We had a drink at the bar that evening, and we said hello, and that was it. And then the following year, we had 2 days where there again was 24 of us in a room. We had I remember one night you were trying to persuade me to go clubbing, and I was just refusing to go.
Well, that would have sealed the relationship.
Absolutely, it would have sealed it. But to that point, we were able to build that trust and that relationship quite quickly. So I guess part of it is also designed about the kind of person you are. If you're willing to give a little bit, I suppose the question that comes out of that is, when you look at the team, are there anybody in the team where you think, you know, they need to develop this kind of this quality, not just in your team, like right across the business, right?
Sure.
You need to develop this quality where you kind of, you create that intimacy a little bit more quickly.
Yeah.
Because if
No,
you
got me thinking as well, because you know the advice that I gave them about trying to build, like you know, work with them and add value. I think the missing component there is like what you've pointed out, that rapport building and that intimacy and trust at the initial stage, right? Instead of diving straight to business. You know, when we were going through coaching and you were coaching me through being and a coach for you know the coachees, one of the things that we talked a lot about was really that first session, right? How important it was to be able to build that level of intimacy and trust by having that bridge and that rapport building, the activities that we do, right? And that goes beyond just, you know, knowledge of how much I know about my products and how much I know about your stuff, but it's by just understanding personal level details and moving beyond
correct.
just the superficial, right? Yeah, it's got me thinking. I've never done that for my guys, and that's good advice, actually.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because, you know, if we even go back to our first year together, in our early sessions, I remember it's still I challenged something, and you were like, instantly you loved it. And it was, you know, and I was just playing, you know, because we're just testing a little bit. And I wonder
Right.
if, you know, when we talk to our people, if there's a way of kind of, you know, pushing them, don't just have a blue jeans call and go through the formality. You know, test the water, play a little bit, be playful, you know, because
Right.
that's who you are. If it's not who you are, don't force it. But I think if it is, then you can make those connections much quicker.
That's true.
And it makes more sense. And look at what happened, because when we came to our second year, we had a whole conversation about who did you want to spend time with developing you in the second year. And because of how things had played out in our first year, we chose to work together again. And I think, you know, for me, that's the same as your overlay guys going in and helping an account manager, them coming and choosing the account manager, coming in and choosing your guys because of what they've experienced. And I think that's true. And I'm seeing it in businesses, this kind of a lot of focus on the calls.
Yeah.
We did a session yesterday in Dubai, right? A Middle East and North Africa sales kickoff. So 35 people. And last year we were in a beautiful 6-star hotel in Turkey, you know, a spa resort. Oh, Kenny,
That's fancy.
Oh, it was stunning. I woke up in the morning, could look at the ocean from, you know, my balcony. And this year, obviously, we're all on Zoom. And the GM for this region said that his record over lockdown has been 13 back-to-back 1-hour Zoom calls.
Wow.
Where he got nothing done all day, literally from 6 in the morning till 9 in the evening. Zoom after Zoom. And, you know, we're all virtual roomed out, no question.
Yeah.
What about, I want to kind of zoom forward to excuse the pun. We've looked back. What about when we look forward? You shared a great story about how in Singapore, if you don't follow the rules, you run the risk of being kicked out of the country, right?
Yeah. They're strict.
When you look forward and you think about your own business planning and you think about the people side of what you do, where do you see challenges and risks to your own team, to your part of the business? Because this virus isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I don't have all the answers at this point, and I believe that I'm trying to keep myself nimble and adaptable at this stage, right? And I think it's important to get feedback and understand what the field is thinking, because I can't come up with ideas and strategies in isolation. So that insights from the team, I think, is really critical. Having reach out to different parts of the organization and getting a sense or a pulse on how they are and what they need, I think is critical. Um, and with Southeast Asia especially, it's not really a one size fits all, right? The maturity level of like all the respective countries vary greatly. The level of interaction required or the level of maturity with regards to solutioning and all that may differ as well. And I'm fortunate to have this diverse team that is spread across all these different geographies. Um, I think the critical thing for me now is how do I ramp up on that as we move forward? I think there's a need, people recognize the need for like solution specialists to help augment the sales teams and drive business forward. How do I kind of build on that further and then plan for that in future as well, right? So right now, I think it's an appropriate time as well because we're going through CY21 planning, and Joseph has asked me before, like, how do you envision your organization in the next 3 years or so? And I think it's important. It's an important ask. So for the first time in probably my time, we've had to look at what are the strategies that we want to accomplish for this organization, for our organization, and how does that align with, the greater GEMS or the APAC organization. So
And I could imagine if you're sitting in a kind of executive leadership role right now, the biggest challenge is the fact that it's so uncertain,
yeah,
right? I mean, we truly are living in a VUCA world of volatility and uncertainty and
yeah,
complexity and ambiguity. I mean, I thought it was just a training acronym, but really it's the reality of
yeah.
where we're living. Out of interest, as because our relationship was built around coaching, um, how has coaching helped you during this process?
What I've learned or coaching
No,
others.
more as in, yeah. How has it helped you with others? Because you were coaching at an exceptionally high level when we last spoke. So how have you kind of leveraged it as in your role, especially when people are so uncertain?
We talked about coaching being this evolutionary journey for me, right? And I find myself still falling sometimes into the pitfalls of moving into mentoring versus coaching, especially in like high stress situations. But yeah, I think it gives me the ability to take a step back and take a different approach. And that happens with some of the guys better than other guys, I would imagine. But yeah, I think it's just about this whole idea of empowering the guys, and yeah, giving them that insights when they need it, but then more importantly, getting them to come up with the answers themselves, right? Honestly speaking, I'm sure I could do better with that. Like I said, the tendency to revert back to mentoring and training is very high. And I think one of the downfalls as well is once we came out of this formality of having to, I have to formally coach, the tendency to fall back is high. And
Yeah.
if you don't consciously draw yourself out of it, you'll end up falling back into the comfort zones of
Yeah,
before,
I
right?
hear you. I hear you. We've just
So
started a new year, so I'm doing all my first sessions again with people, and the same learning is coming up. So I'm constantly reminded, and even after
yeah,
25 years of doing it, there's always that risk that the more you know, the more you tell. And what I found about coaching that I think has been useful for me during this process is it gives me the chance to just sit back, to be quiet, and to give people a really safe space, because my sense, Kenny, is that in the next 6 months, as we move into the next year and we start to try and find a path that takes us back into offices, the real challenge will be people's psychological safety. And, you know, are they able to feel comfortable to come back into work, into the office, travel on the metro, and, you know, for me, then the leader's role becomes even more critical. That opportunity to create that safe space. And for me, I'm already having conversations with, you know, coaches and trainers I work with, when I'll say to them, hey, listen, this client's asking, do we want to go in to the office and run a session? And I get such a different response. You know, some people are like, yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, just give me the date. Other people like, well, I don't want to go into London. I don't really want to take the, you know, the underground system. Someone else saying, how big's the training room? Will there be social distancing? Are there windows in the room? You know, and often, you know, training rooms are quite small. You know, I'm thinking of the room in Singapore. You couldn't really socially distance that easily in that training room because it's long and narrow. And
there's also this paranoia where if you're indoors, it doesn't matter how you social distance, the virus gets around, right?
Right. And whether you're wearing a mask or wearing gloves, and you know, some people won't want to wear gloves and others will, and we can't judge people. So I see this opportunity for coaching to really help people get comfortable with the space that they're in. And I think, you know, when I think of this conversation, maybe the last question, as we kind of come full circle, the last question I want to pose to you is, what's like the funniest thing that's happened over lockdown that you've seen or been involved with? Like, you've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old at home. You must have seen something that just made you laugh out loud, when that just gave some light relief to just the horrible time that we've been experiencing.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I haven't faced. I haven't faced like the webcam mishaps, you know, with like people running and naked or the kids coming and jumping on board. So that hasn't been. I don't know if there's funny moments. I think for me, it's just, I mean, I'm thankful with the time with the family, right? And just this ability to kind of watch the little one grow up, especially the youngest one, the 4-year-old girl, right? And it's just been wonderful to be able to do that, right? Yeah, it's not funny, but it's just, yeah, it's heartwarming, you know, to be able to do that, to spend this time with them.
I think that's something you should treasure, because like you
Thankfully,
said,
I haven't had any, like you said, crazy mishaps or anything.
well, and as you said earlier, right, when have we ever really had the chance to watch our kids grow up?
Yeah.
I think we should end on that point, because I think that's really poignant. It's a really lovely moment.
I have one more takeaway as well, and I think and this was quite profound for me as well. Like I've learned to kind of have a sense of gratitude with the current situation as well. You know, sometimes we struggle and we say, oh my God, it's chaos, you know, having all these kids at home, living in Singapore where, like, you know, we're so small that we can't do anything, and we're all like boxed into tiny apartments and stuff. And you know, I was having this chat with a friend of mine, and you know, people have this tendency to say, you know, oh, you know what, we're all in the same boat here, right? Because of COVID. And he posed a different question. He said, you know what, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats.
Yeah.
Some people are in dinghies, some people are in, you know, yachts, some people are in like freaking cruise liners, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, there are so much there's so much variances with people's situation, right? As bad as you think your situation is, there are some people that are worse. I mean, like if you look in Singapore, where people live in HDBs and they have like families of like 4 kids, and they're like 2-bedroom apartment. How do you study? How do you even find
No.
space and all that, right?
Yeah.
So you know, in one hand, I'm really grateful. In the other hand, I, you know, I can imagine it's very tricky as well. So there's a lot of gratitude with just what we have, and cherishing that, you know.
I think that's lovely, actually, because just offering that perspective, I've often felt over this period that, you know, the world has created a different level of empathy for each other, because we're all experiencing this at the same time, but we are all experiencing it differently.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah, you're spot on. Oh, Kenny, I think, Kenny, we should invite you back as we approach the end of the year. We give you a couple of months to get through your business quarter, and then will you come back at, say, the end of October, beginning of November, and do another one with us?
Like, lovely. We'd love to.
We'll find another topic of conversation. Kenny Chin, thank you so much, and keep well and keep safe.
I've missed our chats as well, Brad. So it's been a pleasure.
Love it. Yeah, me too. That was brilliant. I love it. I'm going to stop recording. We'll post it online, and I'll send you a link.
Gotcha.